with y'all. And just give me a second to load it up. And can everyone see that okay?
That's excellent.
Okay, great. And just the title of this, Preventing Stormwater Pollution, What You Can Do to Help. And this is more for residents. There's different levels for industries, municipalities, different lines of commercial businesses, but this is geared more towards everyday residents of the city. A couple things we're going to go over. Basically, what is stormwater? How does it differ from other things? Where does it go? How can stormwater become polluted? And how to prevent that pollution from occurring. So stormwater, and this is kind of common sense, but it's water coming from a storm, rainfall, snow melt, those kind of things in its purest form. It's just when it hits the ground, especially in urban areas, as you can see from these figures, in natural areas, you have a low amount of runoff. You have, higher infiltration into the ground. When you have cities like Montgomery and other cities around the state that are developed, you have higher amounts of runoff. There's less infiltration. And within that higher amount of runoff, it can also carry particulates, constituents, potential pollutants with it. And basically just say a regular neighborhood house going through a rainstorm. You're going to have things like roof runoff, things from gutters, more concentrated, lawn runoff, street runoff. And this is just a pretty typical neighborhood street. Now, the big difference between stormwater and, say, sanitary sewer, water from your sinks in your house, your toilets in your house, or over there, it's that water goes to a treatment plant eventually. It's treated before it's released back into nature. Stormwater typically is not treated, at least mostly for the older sections of town or older developments, before it goes to our lakes, rivers, streams, eventually to the Gulf of Mexico. There are some nowadays in the city for new development because of permitting and ordinances and laws requiring it. There's actually a requirement for newer developments to treat the first 1.1 inches of rainfall with the newly developed sites. It's called a post-construction stormwater requirement. So that's around the state even, that's kind of relatively new. That was passed down through the Code of Federal Regulations and proceeded to be through different environmental permits that cities like Montgomery have to adhere to. So, what stormwater is, how is it usually collected? Just in typical residential street. A lot of the times you'll see curb and gutter, these big double wing inlets, single wing inlets, and you notice after rain, it all collects, goes towards the street, goes into these inlets. And sometimes you'll have inlets within your yard, or sometimes it goes the back of your yard. Say if you live near a ditch on the back side, it can go directly into it. But you can see it, some of these examples, we deal with lawn care companies a lot, and sometimes people leave things on inlets in the street. We'll talk about that a little bit. Even when it's not raining, there's extra irrigation water flow. So even if you think it's dry, sometimes it's not dry. Now from there, sometimes through these inlets, just say typically, there's a couple of different places it can go. It can be piped directly to streams. It can go, Montgomery has a lot of concrete ditches that replaced natural waterways back in the 40s and 50s when that was the new thing to do. Typically nowadays in a lot of residential developments, you'll see it go to detention ponds or retention ponds, wet ponds. And there are other kind of newer, I guess, like underground detention or different water quality projects it can end up in. But to say, for an example, like an inlet right by this pond in the lower picture, this is piped directly into this residential pond. So whatever's going into the inlet is going straight out into a water system that you see every day, potentially. Now, within residential neighborhoods, all things, it ends up going within your watershed area, basically where water collects. It goes to a concentrated area. It's either a stream or a ditch, and then it eventually goes to the next ditch, river, stream, whatnot, eventually getting to the Alabama River, in City of Montgomery's case, which drains down into Mobile Bay, which goes into the Gulf of Mexico. So what you do upstream of all these things does affect downstream. And you can see just a couple of different maps. The Mobile River watershed basin extends all the way into Tennessee, really. Parts of Georgia, the majority part of Alabama, including Birmingham, Mobile, Montgomery, Coosa River, Tallapoosa River around here. You know, they meet very close to Montgomery. Alabama River carries this into the Mobile Bay Delta. So what's the importance of that? Why do we need to keep things clean, try to prevent stormwater pollution? Well, look around just the city of Montgomery. You have things like the riverfront. The city invested a lot of money. It's a place for people to gather. You want it to be well presented. You want things to be clean, nice, aesthetically pleasing. Even people from out of town coming for the riverfront to events, even at Blount Cultural Park for Shakespeare Festival. There's water features around. So it's on a local, small level. And when you think about it, this is all draining towards Mobile Bay, our beaches, people coming from out of state all over to enjoy the natural beauty of Alabama. So this is one step in a many-step process to try to preserve that natural beauty. Another thing, when you think about just the state of Alabama in general and kind of natural resources we have in the state, there's a few people around the state who have kind of taken that more bigger picture, thinking how can we represent that? And they've kind of come up with America's Amazon. And when you think about things like the Mobile Tensaw Delta, all the freshwater, just the freshwater species of fish in Alabama, the amount of navigable streams and rivers we have, 132,000 miles of streams in Alabama. Alabama it's the #1 state in freshwater fish biodiversity. There are species found just in this state, a lot around the Cahaba region, around Birmingham. And you can see some of these native to Alabama species where we have crawfish, fish, snails, a high percentage of freshwater turtles, mussels. There's all kinds of environmental and aquatic life reasons to preserve that as much as we can. Another important reason, the city, there are some already impaired streams. City of Montgomery, there's a number around the state. This just shows what impaired streams we have listed by ADM and EPA. Pretty sure y'all are all familiar with 3 Mile Branch, Katoma Creek, and Jenkins Creek. These are larger watersheds within the city, and they have different impairments for different reasons. 3 Mile and Jenkins, they're on what's called the 303D impaired list. This is a section of the Clean Water Act, and it kind of designates which waterways or streams have impairments based on sampling and testing from ADM typically. and if they resemble or show problems and impairments in certain things. And you can see, according to ADEM, as far as sources for some of these impairments, say in siltation, habitat alteration, sediment going into the streams, they list it as, and its typical reason is urban development, storm sewers, kind of some type of poor stewardship, maybe construction sites, maybe the quantity as you increase these impervious areas is too large and you have some in-stream erosion. That's very typical around the state. TMDL streams, these are streams that were on the 303D list for impairment. And eventually, after a number of years of sampling, testing, monitoring, they develop what's called a total maximum daily load. So they actually assign how much of a constituent is allowed to go into these streams. And it's assessed by ADEM and approved by EPA. And you can see this is not a new phenomenon, as some of these were approved in early 2000s. A lot around the state have been approved for pathogens, E. coli, fecal coliform, kind of things. It's something to note on Katoma Creek. It's for pathogens as well, but also low dissolved oxygen within the water. We'll talk a little bit. I'll get into a little bit of detail about that. But fish, like people, need oxygen to live. It's just their oxygen comes from dissolved oxygen within the water system, O2, whatever stream they're in. Some typical stormwater impairments for around the state, just from what I see, some of it's relating to mining, agriculture. A lot they'll go for cities, urban development. It just depends on the source, but you see pathogens, E. coli, something, and that just comes from human and animal waste. Low dissolved oxygen, that can be from high nutrients, agricultural areas, phosphorus. A lot of that nutrient was related to specific areas, specific industries, or even agriculture. Siltation, ground disturbance, not having proper practices, large quantities of water compared to the past. High pH, a lot of that's related to industry or agriculture. Even high temperature. All these things, there's specific ones for smaller areas if needed, but all these things generally relate to things that have the possibility of killing fish, aquatic life in general, disturbing the ecosystem of those streams and waterways. And just to note, city and cities of its size around the state and around the country are subject to their own stormwater permit. And it's just for short, it's labeled as MS4, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, meaning that it's some systems around the country are combined systems with sanitary sewer and they all go to treatment plant. That's not the case in Montgomery or many of the cities around the nation in general. This permit basically defines what can and cannot discharge into waterways. There's a number of different programs it covers, from what the city is supposed to do to help prevent stormwater pollution, from public education, illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction site runoff, industrial. There's a number of different categories. In fact, Neighborhood Services over the years has provided me with information on a number of different fronts. So they're getting me back today by asking to volunteer to present. So I do appreciate their help over the years. And this permit, it is also an impetus for certain ordinances and requirements. The city does have a construction site and erosion control ordinance, and also an illicit discharge ordinance, saying what discharges are allowed into the city's MS4 or area where they cover, and what's not allowed, what is allowed, authorized discharges, and enforcement actions. So within the city's permit, and this is pretty standard for many cities who are under this, there are a number of authorized discharges, and a couple that might relate to what you see of your houses or your neighbors or whatnot. You know, firefighting activities, water line flushing. If you see that, that's allowed. Irrigation water is allowed, not wastewater. If there's a irrigation water treatment plant, but your regular irrigation water in your yards. Groundwater, I know not a whole lot of basements around the city, but groundwater sumps and pumps are allowed, the discharge from that. A couple of important things. Residential car washes and charitable car washes are allowed. Now, there are things you can do to prevent some of that water with detergents and nutrients, which we'll talk about, hitting into the city storm system, but it is allowed under the permit technically. And another big one is dechlorinated swimming pool discharges. So chlorinated or even saltwater pool discharges, I got a slide on that a little bit later, can harm aquatic life as well. So a couple things to think about. And since we're talking about illicit discharges, there's one that's common around the state that looks really bad if you see it around, but is actually naturally occurring. And we'll get into plenty of non-naturally occurring ones, but just as a quick aside, this is one where it looks bad because it looks like there's a lot of orange algae in the water, even though the water may be clear around it. This is a naturally occurring process that some things within iron oxide, around the soil and the state, the physiology of the state, groundwater hits it, is intercepted by storm sewer, and it reacts with just water and environment air to cause this really orange looking algae around. It's not the most aesthetically pleasing, but another thing you can tell, it also has kind of a sheen to it as well. It's not really an oil sheen. It's caused by bacteria related to it. And if you're ever out and about and see something like this, it's important to know it may not be related to an oil spill. It might just be naturally occurring. And this sheen usually breaks up in chunks if you do a scientific study called a stick test, where you poke the water with a stick, and rather than an oil sheen, which will swirl around a little bit. So just something to know. All right, so we talked about a couple of different types of pollutants. Now, how do they occur and what can you do to prevent them? Pathogens, E. coli, fecal coliform, human animal waste. Typical causes are leaking sanitary sewers, failing septic tanks, pet waste around the city, dog feces. You will see a lot of bird waste. That's kind of a touchy subject, the way people prevent that sometimes. And even livestock, it's more agriculture. It's not usual resident problems. But just talking about, here's a picture from something we stumbled upon just around the city of Montgomery, actually. Sometimes you will have what's called an illicit connection, where there'll be a business or house that actually, instead of tying into the sanitary sewer system for their toilets and sinks and whatnot, sometimes people, whether it be the plumbers or whoever, is not living up to code, or the building code per se, and they decide to tie into a much easier storm drain. So you will have this every now and then, And the city actually has a program where we go out and look at major outfalls or points of discharge around the city every 5 years and discover things like this. It is not that often. It's not as often as people would believe, but it does happen. And an important thing to remember, just in that, a lot of times where your storm drain basin, your catch basins will be on the side of the road or towards a gutter. A lot of the sanitary sewer manholes are in the middle of the street typically. And it's an entirely different system than your storm sewer system. So sanitary sewer, waste coming directly from inside a house, it goes to a closed pipe, ends up at a treatment plant. Now the condition of the sewer, condition of the lateral from your house to the sanitary sewer, that all comes up. And if you notice things like ground soggy around your house and odors, whatnot, you may have a broken lateral where it's draining into the ground. There are things, even clogged sanitary sewers from grease, rags, different things, people flushing down the toilets. That all causes issues where it can actually cause a backup into those manholes, come out into the street, and go directly into a storm drain. Not a good scenario. No one wants that around their neighborhood. No one wants that around natural environment. And the main difference between that sanitary sewer and storm drain, like we talked about, storm drain eventually hits the waterway directly. There's no treatment involved. A couple things you do kind of prevent sanitary sewer blockages, pump station failures, all those kind of things, is dispose of your grease properly. Cooking oil, grease, it's a big problem around cities. Around the South, we love our food. We love fried foods. It's a big problem when people dump it directly down the drain, especially if they're washing a pan or hot with some warm water. It can go down easily into your sink or somewhere else, and then once it congeals back in the sanitary system, you can get major blockages. But Montgomery Waterworks actually has a grease recycling program, Grease Cycle. They usually provide containers that you can pick up in a number of different parks or apartment buildings. Number of places they'll have a little stand, certain places for that, where you can take an empty container, dispose of your grease, and put it back in, and they'll go out and recycle it. A lot of times these are turned into biofuels. Different cities have different ways of recycling this grease. And you can see, I mean, just even if you're not pouring it down the drain, sometimes restaurants, people decide that storm drain or inlet might be an easier place because they can basically pour it in at the street level and it's out of sight, out of mind. But really, and this is just a restaurant, we had a problem with it. They're just dumping it out of the back door. You can see eventually it's going to hit the storm drain or storm sewer system, and you can see at the bottom right, it kind of makes things nasty on the bottom end, and that's going directly into a stream. So it's something to think about. And usually that if you don't even recycle your grease, contain it, dispose of it in the trash, wipe out your pans, paper towels, something along those lines. And yeah, a lot of grease, it causes what's called sanitary sewer overflows, those blockages or pump station failures from rags or grease blockages. You can just see this is Montgomery Waterworks sanitary sewer over the last 5 years. That's how many gallons were known sanitary sewer overflows, how many events. It changes year to year. And a lot of this is usually contained on site, but sometimes you can get large overflows that just find their way into the stream, and that's not a good scenario. Another quick thing about septic tanks, there are a few septic tanks around the city, not nearly as common, but if you are, and this is kind of a basic layout, a lot of it goes from your house to a septic tank. It is distributed along some drain lines, some field lines. Sometimes those can get blocked. Sometimes the septic tank can fill up and overflow itself. So it is important to maintain your septic system, have it cleaned out every few years. It's relatively inexpensive, but really the septic tank, its main purpose is this waste uses the soil to treat it before it gets to any type of groundwater or even infiltrates through stormwater into streams. This groundwater ends up daylighting into streams eventually anyway, so it's good to keep your septic tank in working order. Pet waste. Just a couple of quick tips. I know folks have dogs, cats. Dogs are kind of the focus on this. Now, pet waste around your house, around your yard, it is up to you what you want to do with it, but it does when you have roof runoff or runoff from your lawn, rain does hit it, and eventually gets into creeks and streams. Now, fortunately, the city does a good job of actually providing different places where you can take your animal and provide pet waste stations around a number of different parks. There's 2 main dog parks, Bark Park at Blunt Cultural and the Rotary Dog Park downtown. So a good idea is pick up your dog's waste, enclose it in some kind of plastic bag, and dispose of it in the trash. Some people, rather than on their lawn, some folks will use it as fertilizer in some plant or bush beds or anything. That's kind of up to you. But if at home, try to have a plan of how to not have that get directly as lawn runoff if you can. In the city, definitely pick up after your animal. Pretty common. So just a couple of prevention tips for pathogens. On sanitary sewer systems, if you notice something like a manhole in the middle of the road becoming blocked, or it lifts the grate off, which it can happen, and things start flowing out of it rather than underneath. It might be time to notify Montgomery Waterworks and Sanitary Sewer. Probably have a clogged sanitary sewer line. Also, the lateral going from your house to the sanitary sewer line, anything back from the right-of-way on your property is the homeowner's responsibility. So just keep that in mind. Good tip, don't flush rags or anything that doesn't belong in a toilet. Feminine products tend to clog up not only sewer laterals, but can get into the sanitary sewer system at large. No oil and grease down the drain causes a lot of different problems. Of course, pick up after your pet. Livestock, if there's anyone around listening who owns some livestock, even in rural areas, there are a number of tips from the extension agencies or Department of Ag and Industry that they'll give you to prevent heavier loads of animal waste. Leave it at that. All right, another topic, potential pollutants. And I'm lumping a few things together into household hazardous wastes. A few examples. These kind of mainly deal with chemicals like cleaning supplies, paint, pesticides. We'll get into lawn care a little bit later. That has other things associated with it, but even concrete wash. I'll go ahead and talk about automotive fluids, like motor oil, transmission fluid. number of different things. And basically, the idea behind preventing household hazardous waste is, one, don't dump it directly into an inlet, dispose of it properly, and try to prevent it from getting down to somewhere where it would get to a stream eventually. So now there's a lot of folks, in the time of COVID, doing at-home DIY construction projects. This is not one of those. Obviously, this is just a commercial construction project, but as you can see, they aren't from the bottom right. It eventually gets to a ditch, and there's a stream downstream pretty close. This is just a random project I found somewhere in the state, not in Montgomery, but if that's exposed soil, even concrete washout, you can see in the picture, a lot of that stuff, if it's not contained or taken care of on site, and this is a lot of this disturbances on the other side of silt fence or other best management practice for that site, it eventually is going to run off into your local street, into your local storm sewer system. So it's just important to know when you're at home, if you're doing anything like that where you have exposed dirt, or and people like to build retaining walls or backyard patios or whatnot, just keep that in mind, that if a rain comes and washes away what you're working on, exposed soil, it eventually gets down to a stream, and a lot of that turbidity in the water, cloudiness of the water, can actually cause fish kills as well. Here's an example, just something around town. There was a commercial business. They were building an addition, well, not an addition, but kind of a garage or something locally, and we saw it actually from the outfall, looking at the stream one day. This big old flow line of something coming into the stream, not natural, not usual, but you can see a lot of their activities are right over a storm drain. Not the best place for that if you're trying to keep that on site and not get it right directly into the stream. So keep that in mind if you have an inlet close to your house, or the stone. If you're doing some kind of small construction project, it can eventually get to that point. It will eventually get to some kind of drain. Automotive fluids, big one. Even around town, there's a number of, outside of mechanic shops, there's a number of shade tree mechanics or people with leaking vehicles on the road. Pretty easy to tell, like the bottom right picture, the staining on the street. You can see even in that street, there's some irrigation water actually in the gutter line, just waiting. So even though there's not a rain event, some of that residual oil staining can get there, and when you see it downstream, it ends up pretty noticeable. Top left picture, we were out looking at things one day. We're checking on some monitoring stations, and one of them's pretty close to an outfall, and saw a little oil sheen on the water, and decided that, well, we need to go trace this back up to see what the source is. Sunny day, happens all the time, and we traced it up to about a quarter mile upstream of this pipe, and it was simply in a parking lot. Someone had a leaking vehicle, left some oil residue, and there was a leaking irrigation line that was running right over it, going directly into a storm sewer system. So even though small amounts and small quantities of oil, transmission fluid, those things are petroleum based, even though it may be small quantities over large distances, it can still be very noticeable and affect wildlife. And this can eventually, if it gets towards the bottom, it can coat stream beds, those kind of things. It can have lasting effects. So there's a long list of tips and prevention tips for general household hazardous waste. Don't pour anything in storm sewer inlets. It's there for storm sewer or any of those authorized discharges. And be careful of what you pour down the sink or in drains or in toilets, because that can affect the treatment process of human waste as well. Keep your vehicles maintained. If the vehicle has a leak that you know of, if you have a drip pan or something that contain it on the bottom where it can drip onto and you can clean it up afterwards, that would be preferred before you can fix it or get to a mechanic. And if you do your own vehicle maintenance, be sure to dispose of your old fluids somewhere. A lot of auto parts stores, even different mechanics around, will take used motor oil. I'm not sure about some of the other chemicals. You may have to ask, but dumping in the yard is not preferred as well, because that will eventually get to any groundwater underneath as well. So just be careful and think about that. And as a tip, if you do have a spill or a stain, especially in the road, if you have some cat litter available or sawdust, some of those things, if you use that to soak up that chemical and leave it on, hopefully for a good while, so it can soak up, and clean it up before rain happens, where exposed areas, that would be preferred to take care of it on the back end. Paint. That's kind of a big one, because a lot of folks like to paint in their house, like to do it themselves. And a lot of times you'll have extra paint left over. Some people keep it for a few years. Some people want to get rid of the excess. And think about, as far as donating some of that, I know Habitat for Humanity, there's restore places you could do that, or if someone might need it, that's always preferred to use what you have. If you just want to get rid of it, if it's a small amount of paint, just say about a quarter of the can left, you can air dry it and make sure it's hardened before you dispose of it in the trash. That's mainly for latex or water-based paint. You can also use cat litter or sawdust in that instance and let it soak it up. But when you think about that, if you're leaving cans of liquid paint in for sanitation trucks, they're eventually going to crush that, and they're going to have crushing capabilities in the truck. So unless you just want to paint the town, it's not preferred. And think about things like spills in the road, just when it goes from trash to truck as well. Construction DIY projects, doing those outside, try containing your soil on site. And maybe think, if you're, say, redoing a patio, consider pervious pavers, or the pavers instead of concrete. Sometimes it allows a little bit of infiltration into the soil. If you're mixing concrete at your house, please don't wash the concrete drum into the inlet. It will harden eventually down the line. And also, with concrete comes high pH, and that can affect water quality as well. There's some science stuff that goes along with that, as far as changing ions of water molecules and with that, but that can end up being toxic to aquatic life. And just a big one, if you know a storm is coming, or if you see rain coming, have a plan to cover up your work, so it's not exposed to that storm water. Okay, another big topic, lawn care, and the main pollutant associated with that are nutrients, specifically nitrogen, phosphorus, a couple other smaller ones, but those are two of the big ones. Fertilizers, not really pesticides, but pesticides can be harmful to aquatic life if it can kill grass or kill bugs. It can also do that within the stream. Yard debris, proper placement not in the road, especially exposed to stormwater. Can cause flooding if it backs up into storm sewers, habitat alteration in ditches and streams, and car washing can also produce that phosphate or that the remnants of phosphorus into the water as well. So I'm going to talk about oxygen demand. This is more a little science talk, but basically these nutrients, they make up something that's called biochemical oxygen demand. And it's basically an oxygen demand by natural process and maximum amount of what could occur in nature based on what bugs are present. Now, I don't expect anyone to memorize these words or know anything about it, but just kind of thinking of what makes up that biochemical oxygen demand. And really, it's a chemistry equation. You have some that's carbonaceous and some that's nitrogenous. You see this a lot in fertilizers. But like say carbonaceous, like glucose, sugar compound. Well, when it hits water, it actually tries to take the dissolved oxygen in the water, those oxygen molecules that the fish use to breathe, and it wants to convert to carbon dioxide and other water molecules. So sources from wastewater, food, trash, litter, grass clipping, animals, all that can cause that glucose to go in and take away that oxygen. Same thing, fertilizers, even wastewater. The nitrogen section of what's in those as ammonium, like say a fertilizer as ammonium nitrate, can actually go in if it's presented in its ammonium form to water. Not only does it take extra oxygen molecules from the water to turn into nitrate and balance out with hydrogen and also water as well, even through this process, it actually creates for a short amount of time what's called nitrite. And that is actually a portion that is toxic to aquatic life on its own. So just think about nitrogen. It has a lot of different constituents. It's one of the, I think it's the most abundant element basically on Earth, just about. So nitrogen found in water and in nature is made up of a number of different parts. And usually this ammonium wants to get down to nitrate in stable form. Nitrate when it hits water. Nitrate, when it goes into the ground and is used by plants, wants to get back towards ammonium in some form. And this nitrite and ammonia, smaller constituents of this, but in that process, both of those are toxic to aquatic life and cause real problems in larger amounts. So kind of what we talked about. So a little bit of chemistry, but how this happens and what you can think about in a stream, upstream on the left, downstream, or even a pond, say a residential pond, is there's a theoretical maximum of dissolved oxygen in water already. It's based on temperature. And there's some biochemical oxygen demand in the water. There's always going to be from sediment or wherever, even leaves falling in, whatnot. When new BOD, biochemical oxygen demand, is presented into the water, a couple things happen. It goes in, it raises that level of that very high, and it starts using that oxygen more and more until it wants to convert through that chemical process. So what you'll see in normal regions, even a pond, let's say if you're in a subdivision with a number of lakes or stuff, you'll see maybe good fish sometimes where the balance is correct. Sometimes you'll see carp taking over, even some larvae, mosquito larvae, worms in some of these lower oxygen levels where BOD is high. Say if a lot of fertilizer gets into your backyard pond, eventually it does naturally recover. But that length and what it can do, it'd be a lot easier just to prevent that biochemical oxygen demand from reaching it in the first place. And some effects, you can see it around the city, some of the green algae present in some ditches. That's kind of the after effects. Yard debris, this is mainly for clogging issues, and it can carry nutrients with it. So this city of Montgomery resident did things the right way, kept the yard debris in their yard ready for pickup from the city. This resident in my neighborhood did it the wrong way. So they leave the grass clippings on an impervious surface. So if a stormwater come along, it just drain right into the storm inlet, cause problems, clogging problems. City has dedicated crews for cleaning out storm sewers. There's issues like this, and you can see at the pipe at the bottom, it just comes and causes issues. Car washing. I'm going to show you, there's a couple of examples actually from commercial car washes, some that didn't follow their own specific requirements set up by 8M and EPA, really. Some that have leaks into the storm system. You can see, causing green algae. They're just pushing nutrients directly into the stream. This is a fun one. It's a different city. It's not Montgomery, but you can see it's pretty obvious that you really don't want this with a bunch of suds, detergent, extra chemicals, turbidity going directly into the storm sewer system, directly into a very close stream about 1,000 feet away from where this occurred. So a couple of prevention tips. Fertilizers, soil testing is important. It determines how much you might need for your yard. Try to use, look for, if you can, non-phosphorus fertilizers. They have a 0. If you see the 3-number system, the 0 will be in the middle. So that'll cut down on some phosphate discharge. Always use manufacturer's recommendations, proper amount, keep on lawn. Try not to do it right before a rain event, because a lot of, say, granule fertilizers will get carried down pretty easily. Herbicides and pesticides, no dumping yet again. There's a number of extension agency has a number of things like alternatives for pest control or even fertilizer, composting, well documented. A lot of great tips in that. And just keep in mind, if you're spraying yard or something close, try to keep it during low wind, during dry days, allow it to actually attach to your yard or weeds or whatnot. And just a general tip, if irrigation water is leaving your yard, you may be overwatering. There's no need for that. It just wastes water. So consider that. Grass clippings and yard debris, the city picks up. You can request if they don't pick up after a while, or if you get skipped, you can call 311 and request that they pick up your yard clippings. And a lot of people, residents around Montgomery, I know, live, just say their house backs up to a concrete lined ditch. Say, I will see every now and then, people, residents, cutting limbs or grass clippings just right directly into the ditch. Please don't do that. It causes issues within the ditch. It adds those nutrients as a pollutant loading. Car washing, whether you do it yourself or go to a commercial car wash. Commercial car wash, consider it. They usually have their own treatment systems, or it discharges into the sanitary sewer system where it's treated. If you do wash your own car, try to wash it in your yard, either on gravel or even grass if you can. I know it's not possible all the time. Or at least try to wash it where it drains towards your yard, rather than where it can soak up there rather than the street. And also you can consider low or no phosphate detergents for your car wash. One thing real quick about pool discharges. I see this as an issue around the state as well. Either backwashing or draining pools. Chlorinated pools, chlorine is toxic to aquatic life. So if you have a person coming out and draining your pool, or if you do it yourself, try not to sit it directly into the street if it hasn't had a few days for that chlorine to dissolve. There's a water analysis kit. You can usually buy them at pool supply companies, and you can test it yourself. It's pretty easy. A lot of times they're provided for free. Saltwater pools, same kind of deal. Salt needs to dissolve and kind of disperse some. So, and just remember, it's all freshwater fish around here. No salt water in the city of Montgomery. So water analysis, same as above, same kind of thing. And try to get that salt content really low before you discharge. Now you can also discharge if you want into your yard slowly. I'm not sure on the waterworks requirements for discharging in the sanitary system. So you would have to ask them if they allow that. I'm not sure at the exact moment what their stance on it is, but it can be harmful. One thing, this comes up once in a while. It's not very often, but we have found people actually having their washing machines discharge into just a regular pipe around their house and discharging it. In this case, it was right into the ditch. These should be connected to sanitary sewer, and you can also get in trouble with the building department if someone decides to let them know about it, because it's against building code. All right, and I didn't even talk about litter too much, because hopefully everyone here knows the effects of litter. I hope if you follow neighborhood services enough, I didn't touch on it enough, but it can carry numerous pollutants. It's aesthetically displeasing. It can clog storm sewer systems, and there's pretty easy prevention measure. Just don't litter. I think I've covered enough on that. Hopefully it's not too late, didn't run up too much time, but keep in mind as well, in neighborhood services, there's 311. It's report an issue. A lot of times, if you think something like this is happening, I'm not advocating to go out and tell on all your neighbors or anything, but you can report it under, there's a item called illicit discharge, and that goes towards the engineering department, the building inspections department, potential code violations. And the thing I like about 311 is it's a citizen reporting program, and the complaints are tracked until resolution. So it remains open until that's resolved. And there's an escalating notification where department heads further and further up get notified of this. So it's good for the city to close these out and find some kind of solution, especially investigate it. And maybe something that's not talked about enough. I like using the mobile app because I'm around the city every now and then. It's all one word if you're looking for it, at least in Google Play Store. It's Access Montgomery. So just a tip. And that's all I had, Cynthia. And everyone, thank you. If you have any questions, I'd be free to answer any you have.
I have a question. I have a quick question.
Yes.
Sometimes I see those some little round tube-like things that's in ditches and stuff. What are those? Are those a filtering device? Or what? It's round tube type thing, and it looked like it's covered by stocking or something. Stocking materials kind of thing. What are those? Is that a filtering thing?
Yeah, yes, it is. A lot of, is it around construction sites? Do you see it?
Yes.
Right. Really, that's a form of inlet protection. But no, especially residential sites, a lot of times it's a small site where they have to get certain equipment and they have the ground uncovered. A lot of times they're required They actually have typically an 8M permit to provide best management practices on that construction site. There's certain requirements they have to meet, but yes, that's basically a filtering system to keep sediment out of that storm drain. Sometimes to different effects. There's some there's some different discussions on how effective some of those things are. It's much easier to prevent erosion at the source than it is to prevent sediment control. It's much easier to work, and just in construction in general, work in an area, smaller area. If you don't touch an area for a long time, have it covered, or have some mulch, grass, something like that to prevent that initial erosion. Because if you prevent that, it's much less likely to be able to make it anywhere. But yeah, there's some straw. They're called wattles typically. A lot of times, even in ditches, they're staked. In certain areas, there's actually Auburn University has kind of done some stuff with ALDOT over the last few years to determine some better practices, how to stake those, what types are best. So there's information out there that goes into design. So, yep. You saw a BMP.
Angela had a question. Go ahead, Angela.
Sure.
Thank you, Cynthia. Hi, Brian. I live in a neighborhood that has a ditch that runs through my backyard. The city is supposed to maintain that ditch, but at the time it's not maintained properly. It's been heavily damaged. The part that's directly behind my house is concreted, but that when they cleaned it out years ago, they damaged the concrete, and it's got actually eroding part of my property because the dirt is coming out through the break in the concrete. And I call every year, and they keep saying they're putting in a work order. And I mean, it stinks. We have that brown foamy stuff that sits on top of the water, on top of the snakes and all the other muck that's in there, and it stinks. And that same smell actually comes up into my home, and I have migraines from the smell that comes from that outdoor. I don't know what is sewer or what, but there's something that's draining into this ditch, which this ditch is supposed to be running to the Alabama River. There was a little medallion placard on the storm drain in front of the yard that said no dumping. This line runs to the river, but they don't maintain it. So, I mean, how do you police the city?
Well, and that's there are limited resources on the city side and on the especially maintaining ditch side, and really a lot of these ditches are kind of controlled by the Army Corps of Engineers.
The city is they're supposed to come out. When I've been here now 17 years, and they used to come out before I moved in the house and years after I got in here, and they would keep it clean, and then all of a sudden it just stopped. It's like pulling teeth. I mean, I've had to bury my dog from the snake bites. My next door neighbor's dog was bitten and killed by a snake. On top of the snakes, everything else that comes along with it, it's atrocious. I mean, I'm trying to do my part. I keep my property clean on both sides of the ditch. My son actually got out there and cut the trees, the woods that the city's supposed to maintain, and actually put them on the curb so it's clear, but they just don't. They need to fix the ditch, the concrete, because it's just going to keep eroding.
Okay. And if it's coming out and eroding, that can be a couple of different things. When you usually report it or call, do you call directly? Do you go through 311, or have you done all the above?
I've got all the above. I have them on speed dial. They know my voice.
I understand. And that's, I work with a number of departments in the city, but me telling them to do something.
You're welcome to come over. I can give you my address.
Actually, I was going to say, if you want to, I hate to ask you to do extra work, but so I have a record of it. If you go to
I
311,
have, yes, go ahead.
Eventually, if you go through the illicit discharge and 311, that does come through engineering a number of times. I will go
Okay.
out and look at those complaints on
Okay.
behalf of the city.
Okay,
So
I'll do that.
if you
I'll do that.
just leave your contact information, definitely address. If you want me to contact you directly, give me your phone number
I
as
can
well
give it
with
to
that.
you. I can give it to you now. It's no problem. No problem. You got your pen ready? I'll give it to you right now.
That's if you include it in that way, I just like to have I get those reports and I can have
Yes.
access to that record. So
Okay.
I know to go
No
out and look
problem.
at it and see what might be going on. There's it's hard to determine what the major problem is in a number of cases as well. So seeing and being able to decide if it's a problem underground, above ground, if it's related to groundwater issues, or if there's some kind of illegal dumping going on, if there's something, there's a number of things it could potentially be as well. So it could be a maintenance issue. So I like to go and investigate every now and then as well.
Okay. Well, I would love for you to come and investigate.
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay, well, I guess we've been here long enough. Angela, he'll get back to you on that, okay?
Yes,
If you get that
thank you.
ticket put in. Do you call them all in or do you enter them yourself?
Me? I
Yes,
called them in. I called them in.
you call them in. Make sure that they
Yes,
get
ma'am.
that illicit tag on it, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Well, I thank everybody for showing. Appreciate it. Thank you, Brian. Did a good job for us.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, yes. We might have to have you back again because there's still more to learn, right?
There's
Yes.
always something out
Yeah.
there.
So that's all thought so. Okay, but thank y'all. Unless y'all got anything for me, we're ready to be done.
No,
All right,
thank you so much.
Bye,
Thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
y'all.
Cynthia.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Bye.